Hello, my dears. Daniela here, and welcome to another episode of the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. So, a topic that comes up nearly every week with my coaching clients is leadership. There's this shift that happens when you go from being a true solo to bringing on a team, and you have to learn how to be a leader. And this is not an easy skill to learn. It takes time, it takes focus. And it's something that I personally am continually working on because it's one of those skills that you never truly master. You've got to continue to develop it. So that's why I was really excited to bring on today's guest to talk about leadership, specifically women's leadership. Now, our conversation covered a variety of topics all around women's leadership. So this is an episode that I would encourage you to share with any woman in your life, even if they're not in the spa industry. So let me go ahead and read Eleanor's bio for you, and then we'll go ahead and play that interview. So Eleanor Beaton is an internationally recognized expert in women's leadership and an advisor to growth-oriented women entrepreneurs. She served as the chair of Visiting Women's Executive Exchange Program at the Yale School of Management and sits on the board of directors of 2 Canadian venture capital organizations. She's been recognized by the Corporate Excellence Awards as Canada's Leadership Coach of the Year and was named by Entrepreneurial Guru for Women Ali Brown as one of the foremost women's leadership experts in North America. Eleanor is the host and executive producer of a top-ranked podcast for women entrepreneurs, Fierce Feminine Leadership. A former journalist reporting for the CBC, Globe, and Mail and Canadian Business, Eleanor was a finalist for the National Business Book of the Year, Canada's top business book honor, and has won national prizes for her journalistic work covering key issues related to women in leadership. Eleanor has spoken internationally at events whose rosters include notables such as the former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She lives in Eastern Canada with her husband and 2 sons. So as you can see from her bio, Eleanor is a real powerhouse. She knows a thing or two about leadership. But what I loved about her is our conversation just flowed so effortlessly. And she seemed so down to earth, but had this calmness and strength about her, which is just leadership. So, all right, my dears, without further ado, let's go ahead and play that interview. All right, Eleanor, welcome to the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. I'm so happy. I'm so excited for this conversation because you are an expert in leadership, specifically women's leadership, which in reality, we need more women leaders. I mean, it's something we talk about. We have a lot of women business owners, but leadership seems to be an area where we still feel, I don't know if it's uncertain or just not having that full confidence to step into our power and what we're able to create. And so having someone like you that's so accomplished and really kind of owning this space of women's leadership, I think it's going to be of so much value to the spa owners and estheticians that are listening today. So thank you for being on the show.
I'm so honored to be here. It'll be fun.
So when I'm working with estheticians, a lot of the spa owners that I'm coaching and kind of chatting with and developing, they can hustle hard, right? They know they go from solo esthetician, they can market, they can do everything themselves. They get to this point when they're kind of around maybe the 200,000 to 300,000 per year mark, and they realize, if I want to create a 7-figure business or an 8-figure business or whatever I'm dreaming or visualizing for myself, I can't do this alone. I need a team. I need a company culture. I need systems. I need processes. I need all of these things. I need messaging. But when they start to hire, it's either like they're hiring the wrong people. Nobody's doing what they want them to do. They're getting frustrated. Like it's, you hear it all the time, you know? So how does leadership tie into building an incredible team and ultimately an incredible business?
I love this question, and I think it's a huge part of it. And so the entrepreneurs that you're talking about, the listeners who've been able to take their businesses to this level, and for a woman entrepreneur, spa owner to take his or her business from startup to the $300,000 level, that's a huge accomplishment. In fact, not many businesses make it that far. So that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. And that requires a tremendous amount of vision. So that person had a vision of what they wanted to create. And then they backed that vision up with their own hustle to make it happen. And so then they create something that, congratulations, this is officially bigger than you now. And I think one of the big gaps that happens is that person is a good leader, but they're not necessarily yet a good manager. Right. And so
that's interesting. Talk about that, because I was listening to Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek.
Yes.
And it said, you don't manage yourself out of a crisis, you lead yourself out of a crisis. And we develop so many managers, but we don't develop leaders. So explain your point of view with that.
Yeah. So I think that's correct in corporate culture.
Okay.
It's not correct in entrepreneurial culture. Like, I totally disagree with him on that. And here's why. And here's what I mean. Yeah. So I think that for an entrepreneur, somebody who is a self-made human being, they are visionaries. They are leaders, right? And so for them, they've been able to create something. So step 2 is I need to get people to come into my organization and pursue this vision with me. And so typically that's the place that it's starting. And then at that point, they quickly need to make that transition and now I need to be able to generate results through this person. So in corporate culture, there's a lot of that. Everything about corporate culture is geared toward managing inside a system that exists. In entrepreneurial culture, it is much more about the vision is here. The entrepreneurs very often are fairly clear on what they want to create, but now they need to incorporate a certain level of clarity, focus, and discipline to make sure that everybody else is not only clear on where you're going, but what you expect to have them get there. It's a key difference, and I think for many entrepreneurs, they will say, have a vision, but I hate managing people. And I'm like, girlfriend, until you embrace this, you're not a true leader. You can't be.
So managing people, I think one of the keys to success there is in communication. Mm-hmm. So communicating what you need, what your expectations are, what the company culture is. But that can be challenging, right? I think women especially have more of a challenge in general. I'm stereotyping here, but in general, we have more of a challenge having these direct conversations and saying we tend to put others before ourselves. And especially estheticians, which in general, we are very much a loving, nurturing group of people. Our clients come to us in an extremely vulnerable state because they're telling us everything they don't like about themselves. They're, oftentimes we're acting as a pseudo therapist because they're there, and it's a safe space, right? And so, we just have this kind of maternal nurturing aspect, but then there's also the other part of it that's like, I want to build a 7-figure company, and I want to, it's like this nurturing mother, like wanting to take care of everybody, but I'm a total badass on the other side, so like, how do you, and it's totally normal, I think, to have both of those parts of your personality, right?
Completely.
But how do you combine those to get your team to see the vision?
Yeah. I love this, and it's interesting. So there's a couple of different practices around this. So the first part, that is the vision. And that does require, that is the difference between a leader and someone who is a manager, but not a leader. And so the idea here is that leadership is really about that vision. And so to your point, even the practice of, let's say you have a weekly meeting with your team, or on Monday morning, you do a little update for people, whatever it is, whenever you bring the group together, reinforce that vision and reinforce your values. Okay, guys, remember, here's what we're on a mission to do. This is our vision. This is what we're creating here. And here are our values. And sometimes it might feel kind of awkward. It might feel overly formal. Have fun with it. But that repetition, is key toward holding that vision. I mean, if you think about it, think about most religions. Most religions have some form of a prayer that you memorize and you say. Why do we do that as humans? Why do we have these things that we return to that memorize? Because that's really critical when you need to believe in something. Right. And so I think really just continuing to come back to our vision and our values and saying it over and over again is so important, because it really brings the team together around what you're trying to build. Then inside that, you need to, as the leader, you're sort of building this ecosystem, right? You're building structure. And so this is where those difficult, that thing where you're going from not necessarily being friends, but being friendly. And as women, that can be very difficult for us to do. I have absolutely, even though I know how to do it, it can still be super challenging for me to have that conversation. I want to talk with you about this. Here's the behavior, that I saw, and that is not what I expect.
I remember the first time that I had to fire somebody before I was, an entrepreneur. I was sick for I had knots in my stomach. I was so worried. I was so worked up. It was such a hard, and I think I was 23 when I had to do it. And I was just I could not handle it. It was so hard for me.
Yeah.
And it was an awful situation, because the woman, unfortunately, just really flipped out and felt attacked. And that made me feel even worse, And so it was it's just such a heavy thing. But yeah, that is definitely a skill, I think, in how you can communicate clearly and directly, but still do it in a friendly and professional way.
Yeah. Well, and it's so, yeah, exactly. Because, and I understand what, our listeners here today are going through. Coaching is very similar. So I'm a coach, and that relationship and building a company where it is all about working with people in this intimate way. So you're very used to this sort of connection that we have with people. Mm-hmm. And then we move from there to a place where we need to manage performance of people so that they can help produce the results that we need to produce. And so here's some things that I've really learned that have been super helpful. So first, there's the mindset of it, and then there's the how-to. Mm-hmm. But the mindset thing, some of the mindset things that I needed to really understand myself, and that I see clients needing to understand, is number one, understanding why are my employees here to begin with? Mm-hmm. It's not, so in corporate culture, there's a lot of talk about keeping your people engaged, about providing a meaningful working environment. In an entrepreneurial culture, which is where our listeners are, no, it's not, you made an offer to somebody to produce results. And it's great. And we value those people. We want them to be comfortable. But at the end of the day, their responsibility is to produce a result. And so we need to be very clear about what that result is.
Your employees are supposed to make your life easier, not harder. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. And I think what you were saying too about repeating your visions and repeating all of that, it's almost even more important when you're very first starting out. It can feel like if it's you and one other esthetician, because so often that's where we let our boundaries get very gray. And that's where we let our policies and let people treat us in a different way. Mm. And so I think when you really act like a company, then, and companies will say like, this is our vision, this is our mission, this is what we're focused on, these are our core values. Even if it's just you and one other esthetician, if doing that and acting like that company now will help you get to that next level. And I think it'll help the employee to really feel like, hey, this is not just a job, but there's actually a career path for me here. Mm-hmm. And if I don't like it, I'm not just going to go and get another hourly job somewhere. It's like, I believe in what this spa owner wants to create.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the people that you want, you know? And so I think that there's a word here, and it's the A word, that I think is so important for any entrepreneur who really wants to build up your skills as a manager and as a leader. And again, I think most of us start out being very effective leaders, and management becomes something that we have to learn after the fact. And that can be really humbling, because by the time we realize how important it is, we typically already have employees. And then we're like, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? I thought I was a great leader. Maybe I'm not, you know?
Why is that box still not unpacked?
Why is that there? You know? Why, you know, everyone, you know, so there's this word, and it's called authority, right? And nobody likes that word, but we're all supposed to be equal, and we are all equal as humans, but you still hold the keys. You are the boss. And it's really important that that's clear, because that is, you know, that is part of managing, you know. And so there's different ways. So if you're in a situation where, let's say, that person who hired it was her and another esthetician, they were friends, you know, and so as they've been growing, maybe the lines are a little bit blurred. You know, maybe things that worked then, as it's growing, they're not working. And it's really important for the owner to step into her authority and reestablish, to kind of reset the boundaries. So there's a couple of ways to do that. So the first is you can start to do it through setting up maybe a biweekly or monthly, just short check-in. And the check-in on your agenda, it could look like this. Hey, what's working? What's not working? And with what's not working, how are you going to take ownership for what's not working? What support do you need? And then here's some feedback I'd like to share with you. And so I think what that starts to do is it starts to really change and shift, so that it's clear that you are there to support, and you're also there, you know, to really provide feedback. And the feedback could be, you're doing a really great job in this area. Or I've been noticing this. I've been noticing that your area is not as tidy as you're not processing things, like whatever it is, right? There's boxes that is not going to work for me. So, and all you have to do when you're delivering something and you're worried, are they going to be mad at me for saying this? Are they going to be upset at me? That's not your business as a leader. Your business is to say this: my expectation is, and then you say what you want to say, that there are no boxes on the front desk at any time.
And I think that the way that I've described it to some of my clients is, you are like, think about being a parent, right? You don't want to be your kids' friends. You want to be their parent. You want to teach them how to be in the world. And so with your employees, you want to teach them how to be in your space. You want to develop them, but you also are not their friend, right? You, just like you were saying, friendly, but not their friend. And I think that they're just like with children, there has to be a consequence if they're not performing. They can't continue to treat you in a way, or otherwise it's going to create a cancer in your organization. Because if they see, well, Susie didn't listen and nothing happened.
Yeah.
Right.
You've just lost your authority in a big way. Yeah. And
yeah, that's such an important piece. And it's hard, but it needs to be done, because when you think about, you know, a question that I ask myself quite often, and one of my coaches told me this, is, if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to? And if you say yes to allowing someone to treat you this way, you're saying no to the vision and dream that you have for yourself. You can plug in whatever answer you want, but everything has, if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to? And that's just been such an important question for me to, always ask in every aspect that I'm doing. And I think that as business owners, everybody should be asking themselves that, because you don't want to put because you don't want to have a difficult conversation, you're relinquishing money for yourself, freedom for yourself, more time with your kids, all of these things, because you don't want to have a difficult conversation.
Well, the other thing is you're also being totally hypocritical. And I say this, and I have been there, right? So I say this with love, but if you as the boss are not having the difficult conversation with someone who's not doing a good job in the way that you want them to do a good job, you are not doing your job. And the thing is, a lot of times we don't realize, oh my goodness, our job changed, because typically we start out and we started out because we were the really awesome esthetician. Otherwise it would be hard for us to be. So we're the amazing esthetician. Then we bring on another person, and then we start to see that we have this vision, right? And so the leader, the practitioner does the work. The leader says, there's more, and this is what this looks like. And the manager is the one who's like, I'm going to create the infrastructure to make this vision possible. So in an entrepreneurial company, you are the manager and you are the leader. And if you are not able, and if this is you, please don't feel bad. Everybody goes through this. Nobody is born good at this. I have not ever met a single person who was born with just easily able to do this. It's work for all of us. I have to tell you a story, because I think where a lot of these problems start, especially early on, is in the hiring process. So I don't know if your listeners do this, but when I first started hiring for my company, I hired people who I was really comfortable with. So an early salesperson that I hired was my sister. I was very comfortable with her. She was good at her job, all of that. Great. So then she left to go sailing around the world. And when she came back, there was a job for her, So hilarious. So I start building up my sales team, and I decide that, we need to bring in more salespeople. So I advertised, there was a fairly rigorous competition. And then I realized I have to put my sister through this competition too. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, she will have never gone through. She'll always be my sister, not a team member in this way. It would be like I made an exception for her. Mm-hmm. So one of the most hardest conversations I had in my business was this. I said, Talitha, as you know, we are building out our sales team, where I'm hiring, and then I'm going to take the successful applicants, put them through this rigorous training program. And I know that I will only have a job for half of them at the end of this, because that's kind of how it is with sales. You're just never sure. Mm-hmm. So I said, I need you to go through this process, and I can't guarantee that you're going to be the one that stays at the end.
And how did she react?
Well, she was like, okay. Because the thing is, she knew, you know what I mean? I think she wanted the opportunity to make sure that she could really prove that she could withstand something like this, that she could go through a tough situation like this too. But I'm her older sister, right? It was so difficult to do that. But I also knew, for the sake of the ecosystem I was building, it was really important that there was no nepotism, that it was fair, that people understood. And she made it. It was
very
great.
Good.
But it was like, I'm sharing this because we can have these tough conversations, right? And that was the moment where I knew that I had really stepped into my power as a leader. And there's nothing more, exhilarating than being a woman who backs herself up, who backs up her vision, who's willing to make the difficult decisions, who's willing to have the difficult conversations, and who's able to have friendship relationships that you cherish, and also working relationships that support the vision you're trying to bring about.
One thing for me, and I know a lot of our listeners have their mom working for them or their sister or their friend. It just kind of happens that way. I mean, in my own business, my sister-in-law works for me now. My brother-in-law has worked for me in the past. My cousins worked for me in the past. And I think what's really important and what's helped me in that aspect is having, again, clear channels of like, we have contracts with every one of them. You treat them, they go through the exact same onboarding process as your other team members.
Yeah.
And the communication, this is the biggest thing. If you want to talk to me as, a family member, then you text me. If it's something about work, you need to message that in Slack, and just having those very clear boundaries, because it gets super gray if your cousin can text you about work, but then your employees cannot, or something,
Yeah, totally. That's the clarity, and it's so interesting because that's the clarity. And it's also the level of detail orientation that is required. It was interesting. Before I started working with entrepreneurs, I did a lot of work with women in corporate. So these were people who came up through the ranks of management, and they were the ones who were able to transition into leadership, right? It's kind of the opposite. In entrepreneurship, you start as a leader and you learn how to manage next.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was so impressed with these women was how detail oriented they were without being micromanagers. So the biggest problem that people have, that entrepreneurs have, is isn't it common sense that I shouldn't have to say this, but I already told them, but,
Mm-hmm.
And I think to your point, that very, very clear communication, being detail oriented in terms of, I'm going to give you a really detailed overview of how we communicate here. So my expectation is, if you're, my text is for personal. If you're a family member and you work here, you can text me about personal things only. All work. So it's detailed, it's specific, and it works for you. And you communicated that. I mean, that to me is excellence in management, and it requires a level of just kind of thinking it through and being detailed.
And I want to bring this back to the hiring process, because something that I think is incredibly important in finding the right people, the hiring process starts with the job posting. If you just post on Craigslist looking for you're going to get a completely different type of applicant than if you say, like, are you such and such type of person that does that, 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 that? Well, you might be the right for this job. Here's the expectations. Here's here's what our company is. Like, having that level of detail orientation, you're going to attract a different level of applicant, 100%.
Yeah. So game recognizes game always. Mm-hmm. Always. If you've got great people, they want to be crew on a tightly run ship, for sure.
Yes. So I think that is like, if you are someone who's having trouble hiring, who's having trouble building your team, and this is, again, like, it took me 5 years to find my dream team, and I feel like I have the best team out there. Like, right. I love my team, and yeah, that's like one of my proudest accomplishments apart from my family. But that took a long time.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of those hard conversations and me learning how to communicate what I truly needed, and learning the type of people. Like, I'm a J, a big J on the
big type J.
Yeah. And I can't have P's on my team.
No. I can be married to one.
I'm not married to one. I'm married to an INTJ. But on my team, because we do everything so structured, and I have a lot of respect for P's, because they can be much more creative and much more fluid, and much more, there is a very clear space in the world for them. And, they probably could bring some great dynamic to our team, but I just can't work in that way, because we are so like, here's this tracker, here's this system, here's this, and you bring a P in there and they're like, what?
Well, and it's so interesting because it requires, if you're a J, it requires just a lot of, there's so much upfront management. and expectation setting, and you have to set the expectations without clipping someone's wings, which is hard to do. It's hard to do, but it's so important.
We ask that on our applications, like, what's your Myers-Briggs? And
nice.
We say, what's your MBTI? And if they email us back and say, what's MBTI? Then we're like, delete.
No, yeah, sorry.
Google it.
Exactly. You just said a lot about you. And I think the hiring process that you're talking about, whether you are, and I think this comes back to this conversation that I had with my sister, and I know because so many women entrepreneurs do this, it's a cool thing, and I don't think it's only women entrepreneurs, it's the guys too, but we have created something, and there are people that we know inside our network who would make great additions to our team. I think it's really important in the hiring process and in the onboarding process, like you talked about, that everything is so clear, that there's a sort of culture of transparency, because at the end of the day, again, as a leader, what we're trying to do, especially once you're not producing the results anymore yourself, your job becomes about creating an ecosystem that produces more results than you ever could on your own. But now you're an ecosystem builder. Mm-hmm. And so it matters what the blueprint is. It matters that, people are going the correct way on a one-way street. That stuff matters, when you have an ecosystem, and so that this is where sort of being detailed. I'll give you an example of something that people can use. It's a tool that I learned, which is a filter. So when I want to delegate something to somebody, what I used to do is I would have a conversation with them. And I would say, here's what I need. Here's what I need it. Da, 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 da. Can you say it back to me? Mm-hmm. And that was fairly effective. But what I started doing is doing delegation filters. So anytime I asked somebody to do something, I would actually write it down. Here's what I need done. So it's what, how, why. Here's why it needs to be done. How. So if you are going to teach that, if you want them to do it in a specific way, here's the main things I want you to think about. When does it need to be done? And even with when, it's what's my first check-in point, mm-hmm. right? So if there's a big project, what typically will happen with entrepreneurs is they're not going to check in until it's done. Because we're just like, well, of course you're going to do it. We get it back. We're like, what is this? What in the hell is this? How did you read these instructions and come up with this? You're brilliant, but this is not. One of the things that, I think as leaders, we need to learn to do is to really be more detail oriented and be like, okay, so here's when it's due, but I want to see this milestone by this day, just to make sure we're on the same page.
And I think to tie it into spa, I've had conversations with people that are like, how do you not know how to clean a room? Or how do you not, like, a simple thing? But it's really like everybody's definition of clean is very different, right? So for you, if you want the baseboards wiped down, if you want all of the different things, you need to clearly explain that in the onboarding process. And It needs, if you need checklists, if you need all of these kind of things, like, it's 99% of the time, if someone's not doing what you want, it comes back to you because you have not clearly explained what you need. Now, if you do, and they're still continually not doing what you want, then okay, then that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's always my first check-in is like, did you explain to them clearly? Do you have it written? Was this in the handbook? Did they go, like that level? And I think that it's hard because we think, well, doesn't everybody do it this way? But no, they don't.
No.
And,
and what got us to where we are is the ability to process a lot of work, to do it quickly, to not get slowed down, all of that kind of stuff, which works when it's just you. And then in some ways, as you start building a team, to your point, it's just slowing it down a little bit. It's like this, my dad used to say, much haste, less speed, so it's like the more we can just kind of slow down a little bit to put those beautiful systems and clarity in place, the stronger, the better the faster, we will move as a team. It's huge. But it's so interesting because did you ever feel, because this is the other thing. So it's also, are you okay with being specific about what you want?
Yes.
So, and I think it's not that a lot of times, I know you are, you know what I mean? You're like 100%, but it's kind of like that. I think too is a learned skill. What you mean? I can be as specific as this, and I can say, I want this and this and this and this. The ability to say that requires a lot of self-worth and confidence.
I think it was hard for me in my 20s. So I'm 39. And when I was in my 20s, I always felt like people thought I was kind of bitchy or kind of had, like this attitude. And really, I feel like I'm like a nice, kind, loving, nurturing person that wants to like help other women, support other women, like build people up. But I'm very direct, and I've always been very direct, and it's not meant to make anybody feel uncomfortable or anything like that. That's just always been my nature, is like just going straight to the point. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with that, because I felt like, is there something wrong with me? Am I doing something? Should I be nicer? Should I be this like sweet girl that doesn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's that kind of persona, like, but once I got into my 30s and was just more comfortable with myself and who I am, now I just own it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a direct person. And, it's done with so much love. And I loved that. Before Luca was born, my son, we do an esthetician business book club, and we read Dare to Lead. And
love that book.
Yeah. And she says, clarity is kindness. And for me, I was like, yes, like let's make clarity kindness, because and not put it like, because if a man is direct, it's just, that's how he is. But if a woman is direct, it can be implied as not nurturing or not feminine in whatever way, So I think that we want to be liked. We have that need. And so there's this belief that if you're direct, then someone might not like you.
Yeah. And this is such a juicy, conversation. So I could not agree with you more, and I think Claire and Brene for that matter, clarity is kindness. And there's a difference between kindness and niceness. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for us. Am I being kind? Because what's not kind? Not being clear with somebody and then firing them. Mm-hmm. Right? That's not kind because you never gave them the opportunity to change. Niceness, I don't have a lot of time for that. It's superficial. It doesn't really mean much. It's great if you have a 2-minute interaction with somebody. Kindness, especially with people who are helping us realize our vision, is so important. And I think to your point, that clarity. But it's interesting, there's this whole rewiring that we as women have to do, which is as nurturers, a lot of times we're taking responsibility for how people feel. Mm-hmm. And as a great leader and manager, what's important is that we're taking responsibility for being clear and creating kind of the constitution of our own business. Mm-hmm. Like that's what key, you know what I mean? Having very clear expectations and systems, and really ensuring that there's a culture where people live by those, where there's accountability, where you're creating a great team, culture. And sometimes you have to enforce something, or you have to draw attention to something. And in that moment, they might not like you, but they'll respect you. Like I think about growing up, my parents gave me tons of feedback. And in that moment, I did not like them at all, but I loved and appreciated them. Mm-hmm. We were talking about in the green room about Last Dance, this Netflix documentary about basketball. I take for those of you like who are listening, I find team sports interesting around this. So if you think about, like, I'm a big basketball fan, so I'm watching the NBA playoffs. The Raptors are my team. So the leader of a sports team, who's typically a general manager, will hire people, will bring people in. There are clear expectations, and they are also okay about saying, you know what, you're not a great fit here. You need to go to this other team.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing personal. We're trying to create a winning organization. And I think that we as women can take a lot of, and as spa owners can take a lot of inspiration from that. It's not personal. You can be kind, but it's really about, you might not like me in this moment, but my responsibility is to the vision.
Yeah, that's a lot easier said than done. I think
Totally.
That is going to take some practice. But what do I want to just kind of wrap up this conversation. What advice would you give to these spa owners? Like, what's something actionable that they can do today to become a better leader? Like, even if it's just a baby step, like what's something, all right, you listen to this episode, like, let's not just be like, yeah, I need to be a better leader. I need to be whatever. Like, what's something they can do to make change?
Okay. So one thing to do is to set aside time to have a one-on-one with all of the people who report to you, and do it regularly. So you decide at least once every 2 weeks, and it doesn't have to be more than 15 minutes. Okay. If that, and the purpose, it can be a standing meeting. Hey, Angela, I wanted to have a quick check-in with you. What's working? What's not working? How can I support you? Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. I wanted to give you some feedback. Here's what I'm noticing you're doing really well. And here's one specific thing I would like you to do differently. If that, what this does is it's an easier way to get you into the habit of giving feedback, of addressing things.
Like you were saying earlier, establishing your authority
and getting used to how that feels, and because it's not like you can do it. You can do it. You just need the practice. And so this, I think, is a baby step, getting those on the calendar and not overlooking them or not doing them. That's critical.
So you have a podcast. You're, I'm sure, on social. Where can people find you, follow you, connect with you? Because I'm sure they're going to want to hear more of what you have to say.
Oh, I love it. So they can go to the Power Presence Position podcast. And I'm on Instagram at Eleanor Beaton.
Perfect. And we will put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation. I really appreciate your time, your expertise. And for all of you listeners out there, if you want to keep the conversation going, please head over to the Spa Marketing Made Easy Facebook group, and we'll catch you on the next episode.